Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. The Trudeau Liberal carbon tax is going up by quite a bit. We speak with the federal director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation to see how much more it will cost you. We hear from a biochemist who breaks down exactly what is in the COVID-19 vaccines. And we hear about how one Christian organization is helping families in war-torn Azerbaijan rebuild their lives.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. The Alberta government is rolling out a new substance use surveillance system. Government officials say the program will offer better help towards addictions response and support recovery for those who need them the most.
Addiction continues to claim lives and tear families apart each and every day. This is why we remain steadfast in our commitment to build a holistic mental health and addiction care system in Alberta. Prior to a pandemic, our focus on recovery-oriented services was having a positive impact. In fact, we saw an 8.6% decrease in the number of opioid deaths in the first quarter of 2020 compared to the same time of last year.
The rate of opioid overdose deaths amongst First Nations has increased by 61% from 2019 to the first 6 months of 2020, compared to 36% amongst First Nations Albertans. So there is clearly much more that must be done.
According to the province, there have been 904 overdose deaths in Alberta so far this year. Of those, 455 Albertans died from an accidental opioid overdose. As you've heard on Bridge City News, the Trudeau Liberals are planning on increasing the federal carbon tax by more than 550% by the year 2030. The rate will go from $30 to around $170 per metric ton. That'll make it a lot more expensive for you to heat your home or to fill up your vehicle. Joining me now to talk about it in more detail from Ottawa is the Federal Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, Aaron Woodrick. Aaron, how much more will it cost the average Canadian?
By 2030, you're looking at about $20 to $30 every time you fill up your car at the gas station. And that is just for, filling up your car. Obviously, there'll be things like increased cost of home heating if you use natural gas. You could be looking at up to $900 a year more in cost. So this is a substantially big tax hike. There is a rebate involved with it, so I do want to say that, but they're claiming that somehow everyone is going to be better off with the rebate. The reality is it's going to depend on where you live and how much energy you use.
How much specifically will be going up next year in 2021?
It climbs incrementally. So you're looking at about 4 to 5 cents per liter on gas. That's what it's been the last few years. That's what it'll be for the next couple of years. And then it'll leap even more past 2022 each year. So it is sort of the lobster being boiled in the pot. It's going to go up slowly. So eventually it will be very warm in that water, but it's going to go a little bit at a time.
So if Canadians don't agree with this large carbon tax grab, what can they do?
I certainly encourage them to speak to their member of parliament, let them know how upset they are about it. And of course, exercise your voice, write to your not just your MP, but the Prime Minister, and make sure you vote at election time for parties that pledge to do something about it.
That was Aaron Woodrick, Federal Director of the Canadian Taxpayers Federation, joining me from Ottawa. You know, it's no secret that businesses in Lethbridge have been struggling due to new COVID-19 restrictions implemented by the Alberta government. As Micah Quinn explains now, Munro Salon is offering new incentives to the businesses they rent out to during the holiday season.
Munro Salon Studios has decided to give back to struggling Lethbridge small businesses that can't operate as they normally do because of the new COVID-19 restrictions. They are doing this by letting them operate rent-free inside of their building.
And then what we did is we went, okay, we have some spaces open, and we know that Lethbridge, everywhere has been hit so hard with markets being shut down, and just this is the time of year that people really rely on and bank on everybody getting, buying for Christmas. And so that really helps people to carry through those slower months coming, like January, February.
Cafe Noir and Majesty Salon and Aesthetics are accessing the free rent from Munro.
Free rent right now is like a complete game changer, and it's also a huge weight lifted off of our shoulders. Like, people have been really good about supporting local, and with the coffee shop and the salon, people can still come in to purchase like retail from the salon or a coffee to go type of thing.
Kellington says that Monroe hasn't been able to access any government help during this time because they are a new business.
So we've looked at rent subsidy, which is 65%, that we do not have access to. The lockdown subsidy is 25% that we don't have access to. CEBA has now increased to $60,000. I don't have access to that. There is not one government loan that we have access to. And it's such an oversight. So basically, if you don't have a 2019 tax return, you do not qualify.
Kellington says that she reached out to Lethbridge East MLA Nathan Newdorf, who said he's going to look into help for new business owners, and she also reached out to Alberta Premier Jason Kenney, but she has yet to hear back from him. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
The Owl Acoustic Lounge in Lethbridge is moving into a new location just a block away from their old building. Now with that comes added expenses for renovations. The company has brought in a Kickstarter that has currently raised just under $20,000. The money will go towards helping out for the cost of a new stage, and there's an added incentive for people to donate.
This stage will be built by the community, so if people are contributing to it at the lowest tier of the Kickstarter, then we'll literally put their name on it because that's who's essentially building it, right? Completely shocked and overwhelmed, to be perfectly honest. We set the goal at 7,500, thinking like, okay, well that we thought it was like that's maybe a realistic kind of target that we could get to at the end of 30 days, and it turned out that we hit it in under 5 hours. So completely caught us off guard.
The Kickstarter will be up until January the 14th. The Christmas story is one of the most iconic stories of all time. Jesus' birth has been told in so many ways. Evangelical Free Church in Lethbridge will be putting on a performance of their own, told from the perspective of a young shepherd. The drive-in production will run from December 21st through the 24th. Pastor Jeff Heth says a performance like this is great for Christians to connect with God during the holiday season.
The Advent season is all about our Savior coming to earth and offering us hope in the midst of whatever we're going through. And this phrase from the traditional Christmas hymn, "A weary world rejoices," is what we really hope to bring across to everyone who comes to this here, that there can be rejoicing in the midst of struggle and trial because our Savior emptied himself of his divinity and came here and lived among us and walked among us, the God-man, Jesus, so that he could experience what we experience here and then provide us hope, not just for now, but for eternity as well.
There will be 9 shows a night, and there are 21 spots available for each show. During the Christmas season, it's very important to crack open your Bible. Now that's according to Pastor Rowan Crown from Amazing Grace Community Church in Lethbridge. Pastor Crown says when he sits down to celebrate Jesus' birthday with his family, they traditionally turn to the book of Luke.
What we do as a family and what we've done for years, which I think is awesome, is we celebrate Advent and we take that whole month leading towards Christmas and we read scriptures, or we take time to talk about the importance of the nation of Christ. So this year as a family, we've been reading through the book of Luke, starting at Luke chapter 1. And by Christmas Day, we'll read through together the whole book of Luke, and that's been really good.
Catch the full interview with Pastor Rowan Crown discussing why Jesus is the reason for the season. That's coming up later in our program. You know, it's not too late to donate to Lethbridge Family Services Angel Tree campaign. The Lethbridge Hurricanes have partnered with the organization through the Tees for Toys fundraiser. The initiative is put on by the Western Hockey League. With the purchase of a Canes t-shirt, $7 will support Angel Tree.
If you're interested in buying a t-shirt, you still can. They probably won't arrive in time for Christmas this year, but the donations will still be given to Angel Tree. They are available for purchase online at whl.ca/tees4toys. And we are just hoping everyone is staying safe, staying healthy, and we're hoping that we can see everybody in the new year at some time.
There are 22 unique WHL t-shirts you can purchase. Each club has chosen a local organization to fundraise for. Lethbridge Fire and Emergency Services is reminding everyone to be careful around candles. A candle that tipped over in the kitchen was the cause for a blaze around 12:43 a.m. today at a home on Oxford Road West. When fire crews arrived, they found light smoke flowing out of the home's front door. Flames were visible out of the rear kitchen window as well. Members from 2 stations responded and extinguished the blaze. Fortunately, there were no injuries, and damage is estimated at around $80,000. RCMP in Coaldale arrested a man around 7:45 last night who was allegedly threatening people with a large hunting knife. Police say the original complaint came in around 3 p.m. when the 33-year-old of no fixed address threatened a young person with his weapon. The man was later located at a local restaurant and was arrested. Police found a small amount of drugs on the man, which they say may have contributed to his erratic behavior. The man is charged with drug possession and attempted assault with a weapon. He'll appear in Lethbridge Court on March the 10th. A union that represents transit workers says a Winnipeg bus driver is improving in hospital after the bus he was driving slammed into a house yesterday. 8 people were taken to hospitals after the bus veered off of the Henderson Highway. All but 1 were in stable condition. Officials say the bus driver's condition improved from unstable to stable condition. Saskatchewan is expecting another big shipment of the Pfizer-BioNTech COVID-19 vaccine next week, kicking off the first official phase of the province's vaccination rollout plan. The phase was not supposed to begin until the end of December. The government says the next delivery of the vaccine could arrive on Monday. That shipment will also be used to vaccinate 1,950 healthcare workers in Saskatoon hospitals. A team of chemical and biological engineers at the University of Saskatchewan is trying to build an air purification system that could neutralize the COVID-19 virus. Officials say it may be quite effective since the virus is found in droplets of water in the air. They say they're working on a filter that produces active forms of oxygen, which could zap the virus and take away its potency. A prototype design has been developed and being tested at the Canadian Light Source in Saskatoon. There are reports coming in that some people who have received the COVID-19 vaccine have had a dramatic allergic reaction. An allergy specialist and a doctor in the United States says it does happen, but for the most part, vaccine reaction should be quite low.
The relative risk right now of having a reaction to the vaccine is extremely low, as far as we can tell. And so you may have an increased risk, but your risk of getting COVID, your risk of having a bad outcome from COVID is much greater. With only 5 reported cases, it's very hard to say that we have any information as to who really is at risk. Clearly, there's no risk if you have a food allergy or if you have a venom allergy or you're allergic to ragweed or anything like that. That's not something to worry about. And I think it's pretty safe to say that it's very unlikely that somebody's going to react to all of the types of vaccines that we're ultimately going to have.
Now, when it comes to the COVID-19 vaccine, it apparently contains many naturally occurring ingredients. That's according to Dr. Fazal Rana, who's a biochemist and the Vice President of Research and Apologetics for Reasons to Believe.
So everything in the ingredient list has been disclosed, and the chemical formulas are well known, and their biological effects are well known. Most of the ingredients are things that occur naturally in our bodies. The buffers that are used are naturally occurring. There's cholesterol, there are phospholipids that are naturally occurring membrane components, sucrose, which is a cryoprotectant. RNA is part of our bodies, and the RNA has been modified, and the modifications are proprietary, but it's designed to improve the stability and reduce the immunogenicity of the RNA.
Dr. Rana will have more of what's actually inside of the COVID-19 vaccine in an interview with Jeanette Rocher coming up after Business News. The Trudeau Liberals are investing $9 million into studying treatments for COVID-19 vaccine. PM Trudeau says the funding will go to 4 Canadian companies, 2 in Vancouver and the other 2 in Montreal. Canada is set to receive 125,000 doses of the Pfizer vaccine each week next month. Trudeau says pending Health Canada approval, 168,000 doses of the Moderna vaccine will also be shipped by the end of the month. Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says he knew it would be too tough to lift all boil water advisories in First Nations communities by March of next year. Trudeau says COVID-19 restrictions have blocked access to certain Indigenous communities. He says despite adding more money and pressure, it wasn't enough to speed things up.
We always knew it was going to be a challenge to reach. The 11 or so communities that we suspect won't be able to be within that goal of March of next year. Coronavirus blocking access to certain certain communities. It became clear over the past month or so.
Ottawa says Indigenous Services Canada will get $30 million to boost its community support fund for First Nations, Métis, and Inuit communities. The federal government also says Community Food Centres Canada, Second Harvest, and the Salvation Army will receive just under $9 million each to support food security there. Agriculture Minister Marie-Claude Bebeau says the government understands that there are many needy families this time of year, and it'll also distribute $1.5 million to both Food Banks Canada and Breakfast Club Canada. A report last May says 14.6% of Canadians surveyed said they had trouble putting food on the table. Canada's Minister of Defence says the Canadian Armed Forces cannot function properly if there's hate and discrimination in the ranks. Harjit Sajjan says tackling such misconduct will be a top priority for Canada's next military commander. Sajjan launched a special panel made up of former military personnel who will provide ways to eliminate racism in our military.
It doesn't matter it's 1 or 10. When you have an incident like this, I always question is how could this happen inside our military, right? And so we've been good at when you find out, you deal with it. But what I want to do is, how did it happen in the first place? So we have to ask ourselves, how did this person get in? Who knew about it? What was done about it? And so those are the steps that we're taking now of looking at, are we empowering our leadership so they have the tools to be able to deal with these issues?
Foreign Affairs Minister François-Philippe Champagne says he will not take any criticism over Canada's efforts to bring back the 2 Canadian Michaels. Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor have been held captive in China for 2 years now. Champagne says he forcefully delivered a message to China's foreign minister to release the 2 Canadians this past summer.
Well, I'll do what I think is in Canada's best interest, trust me. Yeah. I'll take no lessons from anyone, and certainly not from China when it comes to defending and standing up for values and principles and defend Canadian interests and defend Michael Kovrig and Spavor. That's for sure. And I've been very clear when I was in Rome that I will speak my mind, I will speak up and stand up. And the world, I think you've seen this here. If you look, for example, this was raised in the EU-China summit. I think it's one of the first time in recent history where you see that the consular case of citizens being mentioned in the communique to say, we care. So my point is that we're going to stand united. That's what we have achieved. And I think, and we're going to see what we can, at every step of the way, we're always talking with our allies and our friends and our partners to see how can we make sure that this remain a priority not only for Canada, but for our colleagues and partners around the world.
Samaritan's Purse is on the ground in Azerbaijan. The Christian organization is serving people who've lost their homes and loved ones due to the ongoing conflict in the war-torn region. Edward Graham has an update for us from the city of Ganja.
Right now I'm in Ganja, Azerbaijan, and this location right here was a missile attack, and multiple attacks over a span of a couple days hit this city.
Behind me you see the ruins of a building that was attacked about midnight. There were 10 people killed and over 100 were injured. So we're here talking with Christian leaders, seeing what we can do to help in Jesus' name.
And just right after these attacks, a team here in Azerbaijan that was out here serving came out and did food distributions for those that were displaced and lost their homes. They came here and they served. But the love of Jesus Christ, no matter what side of the war and what side of conflict, God loves all people. And that's what we're here at Samaritan's Purse, to serve both Azerbaijan and those in Armenia. And we're on both sides of the border right now, but we need your prayers and we need your support. Be praying for these 2 nations for a healing and for a healing that only the love of Jesus Christ can bring about. Thank you.
The northeastern United States is still digging out after a storm there buried some areas under more than 3 feet of snow. Look at all that shoveling going on. The storm that ended Thursday broke records and left snowplow drivers in New York State and New England struggling to clear the roads. Most of the snow in our region has melted thanks to those warm Chinook winds, and the mild temperatures for southwestern Alberta will continue into the weekend. Full weather details are on deck. It is so hard to believe that we're only a week away from Christmas. In fact, if you live in southwestern Alberta, it looks more like spring outside than winter, doesn't it? Jeanette Roche is here now with a full look at the weather forecast. Jeanette, we may even see double-digit temperatures this weekend.
Yeah, you're right. However, that 14-degree day is now changed to a 12-degree day. 14 degrees now going to be on Monday, but still double digits. You are absolutely right. Lots of wind coming with those warmer temperatures, though, including tonight. We could have some wind gusts from 70 to 90 kilometers per hour this evening into tomorrow, Saturday as well. Gusts up to 90k at times. 7 degrees is our high. 12, as I mentioned before, our high for Sunday. Windy also. Windy conditions expected Monday as well. 14 degrees the high, and then the mercury is going to plunge a little bit down to -5 on Tuesday. We could expect some rain Monday night into Tuesday. That's going to change to snow, and then we're going to see a temperature climb a bit on Wednesday up to 5 degrees and 8 degrees on Thursday. So certainly above the seasonal average high for this time of year, which is right here, 0, -12 the average low. 14 degrees was our high temperature back in 54, and back in 55 it was -34. 8:24 is when the sun rose this morning, and our Friday afternoon sunset will be at 4:32 p.m. So there we go. We are 1 week away from Christmas exactly. Wind warning was in effect today and overnight on the west coast. Going to bring with it some breezy conditions, also quite a bit of heavy rains. 8 degrees the high for both of those cities, Victoria and Vancouver. Vancouver could expect heavy rains tomorrow. Lots of sunshine expected across Alberta tomorrow. 1 degree the high for Edmonton, 5 for Calgary. Edmonton could see a bit of wind gusts up to 60k, Calgary up to 50k, so not as bad as Lethbridge. Snow expected in Saskatchewan tomorrow. 0 the high in Saskatoon, 1 degree the high in Regina, -2 over in Winnipeg with a mix of sun and cloud. Keep in mind with the wind chill, those temperatures could feel a little chillier. Toronto going to be having some rain in the morning, could change to snow by the afternoon. 3 degrees the high there, -7 in Ottawa with flurries expected, -7 also expected tomorrow in Montreal with a mix of sun and cloud. As we look into Atlantic Canada, beautiful sunny day in Fredericton. It's been a while since they've seen the sunshine there. -6 is the high there. 2 degrees the high for Halifax with increasing clouds. Charlottetown, 0 with a chance of flurries. Chance of flurries also expected tomorrow in St. John's, Newfoundland with a high of 1 degree. So there you go. That is your forecast.
Trans Mountain is shutting down all construction on its pipeline expansion due to safety concerns. Officials from the company and the Canada Energy Regulator said a contractor was seriously injured at the site in Burnaby, BC on Wednesday. In a statement released late yesterday, Trans Mountain says the company is enacting a voluntary project-wide safety stand-down until January the 4th. The company says its priorities are the safety of its workers and creating a safe working environment. BlackBerry's reporting a third quarter net loss of $130 million US. That is 4 times higher than the same quarter last year. The Waterloo, Ontario-based company says revenue also declined 18% to $218 million. On an adjusted basis, however, it says it earned $224 million, which is ahead of the $219 million analysts were expecting. The technology company says it is banking on partnerships with Amazon and Zoom to bring in steady revenue going forward. CP Rail has announced a new pilot project to build the first long-haul hydrogen-powered train in North America. The railway company says it will retrofit a long-haul locomotive with hydrogen fuel cells and new battery technology. It says it will then test the new electric traction motors to see if hydrogen technology is ready for the freight sector. Officials say the project will position the Calgary company as a leader in decarbonizing freight transportation. As Le Chateau prepares to close after 60 years in operation, the company's founder and wife have resigned as directors. The Montreal-based company thanked Herschel Siegel and his wife Jane Silverstone Siegel for their service and dedication. Siegel started the company in the late 50s and later co-founded David's Tea, which is also under creditor protection, but is restructuring under the leadership of Siegel's daughter, Sarah. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was down 118 points today to finish at 17,534. The Dow was down 124 points to 30,179. The S&P 500 was down 13 points to 3709, and the Nasdaq was down 9 points on the day to 12,755. West Texas Intermediate Oil was up 73 cents to 49.09 US per barrel. Natural gas was up 7 cents to 271 US. Gold was down $4.08 to 1881.35 US an ounce, and silver was down 25 cents to 25.81 US an ounce. Wheat is at $272 per metric ton, barley's at $275, canola's at $623, and corn is at $295 per metric ton. Live cattle were up 40 cents to 114.85. Feeder cattle were down 53 cents to 140.45, and lean hogs were up 30 cents to 65.80. The Canadian dollar was down slightly over the past 24 hours to 78.21 US. Recapping one of our top stories this hour, the Canadian Taxpayers Federation says the Trudeau Liberals' carbon tax will make life a lot more expensive for Canadians in the coming years. The group's federal director, Woodrick, says the massive tax hike expected will raise gas prices as much as 39 cents per litre by the year 2030. Woodrick says when Ottawa raises the federal carbon tax from $30 to $170 per tonne, it'll also cost considerably more to heat your home. Coming up, a doctor who will explain what exactly is in the many COVID-19 vaccines. Dr. Rna says the doses actually contain a lot of naturally occurring ingredients. He'll have details coming up in just a moment in our Q&A with Jeanette Roche.
Nations around the globe have had their best scientists pushing hard and fast to develop a COVID vaccine, and now they're beginning to be put into action. Is this the answer to the pandemic, or is it too soon and potentially a long-term health problem? Joining us from Upland, California is Dr. Rna, the Vice President of Research and Apologetics at Reasons to Believe. He is a biochemist and is the author of Humans 2.0. Dr. Rna, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Now, Dr. Rna, how much do we know about the new vaccines coming out now? First of all, do we know with any certainty how effective they'll be at preventing the spread of COVID-19?
Well, all indications are that these vaccines from Pfizer, BioNTech, as well as from Moderna are going to be highly effective. The phase 3 clinical studies indicated a 90% effectiveness rate. Just as a point of comparison, the annual flu vaccine that we receive is about 40 to 60% effective. So these are potentially highly effective vaccines.
That's very good news and should put a lot of people's minds at rest. So I understand that these particular vaccines are what is called a messenger RNA vaccine. So some people believe that this actually changes our DNA. Does it? Can you explain this?
Yeah, these vaccines are inherently safe. And so the vaccine is not going to change anybody's DNA. And the reason for that is because the key component, as you mentioned, is messenger RNA. And this molecule is not actually very stable. And so the researchers that developed these vaccines actually had to do some alterations to the structure of the molecule to make it more stable, just long enough to get to the cells. And they also had to encapsulate them in what's called a lipid nanoparticle to also afford protection. And then once the RNA is in the cell, it essentially is used by the cell's machinery to make the spike protein for the SARS-2 coronavirus, which is what elicits the immune response. But the RNA then is almost immediately broken down inside the cell, and it is never going to make its way into the cell nucleus where it could affect any kind of genetic change. So it's an inherently safe vaccine.
That's great to hear. So have mRNA vaccines ever been used on humans before this time?
No, this is a first. This is the first time, these RNA vaccines have ever been used in humans, but it doesn't mean that they're new. People have been working on the concept of RNA vaccines for several decades, and even as recently as 2018, researchers have actually done a number of animal studies looking at using these vaccines to protect against a number of different viral diseases. So it was really at the point where we were already about to transition these vaccines into human clinical studies that COVID-19 hit.
So Dr. Rna, do we know the length of time COVID vaccines will provide protection for?
This is really the million-dollar question right now, is nobody really knows how long immunity will be afforded to people that have gotten COVID-19 or who have the vaccine. Initially, the concern was that immunity would not be very long lasting, but more recent studies actually are indicating that the immunity very well may last for months, maybe even years. And so this is actually really good news. And so it means that a worst case scenario would be people would have to get an annual booster. That's the worst case scenario. It may very well be people get vaccinated and they're good for several years.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you, will these vaccines have to be updated every year, just like the influenza vaccines need to be?
Yeah, well, with the influenza virus, it undergoes quite radical mutations from year to year, which is why the vaccines need to be updated. It doesn't look like the SARS-2 coronavirus will undergo that level of mutational change over time. So it may be that in a few years, these vaccines may need to be updated, but I don't project that being the case, at least for the next few years.
Okay, so would someone who has been vaccinated still need to wear a mask and adhere to social distancing?
Yes, I think unfortunately that is going to be the case because remember, even though the vaccines appear to be effective at about a 90% rate, 10% of the people that get them can still acquire COVID-19 and can spread it to other people. And we don't really know necessarily who that's going to be. And so, bottom line is, in the short term, people will still have to wear masks, still have to practice social distancing, not only to protect themselves, but really to protect other people who have yet to be vaccinated.
Yeah, for sure. So the concern many people have is that because the process has been too rushed, there's a potential health risk. At least one vaccine has had some side effects of Bell's palsy show up in some patients. So how risky are the vaccines potentially? You were kind of alluding to the fact that you think they're pretty safe.
Yeah, well, we have to remember that these vaccines were given emergency approval simply because we're in the midst of a pandemic. And the regulators looked at the data and saw how effective the vaccines were and didn't see anything that really indicated that they would be unsafe on a large scale. With any kind of medical treatment, including vaccines, there's always potential for side effects. You never can really escape that. And so the biggest concern that I've seen is for people that are hyperallergenic, who respond to things by developing allergies really quickly. They might be susceptible to an allergic reaction to the vaccines. As you mentioned, there in both the Moderna and the Pfizer studies, 4 individuals developed Bell's palsy. It could be due to the vaccine, or it could just simply be happenstance. So that clearly isn't understood. And so I imagine we will see side effects emerging over time as these vaccines are used more broadly. But I think those side effects are only going to affect a relatively low number of individuals. So as a whole, I think these vaccines really are safe.
There's ongoing debate as to whether the COVID vaccine should be mandated for health workers and even for the public at large. Any thoughts on that? Is this ethical? Is it necessary?
Yeah, the idea of mandating vaccines, I think, really doesn't sit well with most people because they see that as robbing them of their individual rights and their individual freedom. I probably anticipate seeing something that would be called an if-then mandate more so than a universal mandate, meaning that if you are, for example, a healthcare worker, or if you are a first responder, then you must get the vaccine. If you perhaps are a teacher or student, you must have the vaccine. We already require students to be vaccinated before they can go to public school. So I would see more like an if-then mandate. And that way you don't rob people of their individual freedom to choose to be vaccinated or not, but that you put in place common sense practices so that if people are going to travel or if they are assuming certain roles or positions in society, they must be vaccinated.
Right. There's also debate as to the ethics of who should receive the vaccine first. Should it be healthcare workers, the elderly, government employees, children? Any thoughts on how that should be handled?
Yeah, right now my biggest concern is with the equitable distribution of the vaccines. And, Moderna thinks they can produce about 1 billion vaccines by the end of 2021. Pfizer and BioNTech think they can produce about the same number. So that's about 2 billion vaccines. There's 6 billion people or so in the world, which means not everybody's going to have access to the vaccines within the first couple of years, I project, unless we develop more production capabilities. So that's going to be a real issue. And so when it comes to an individual country, an individual society, I think that the common sense approach makes sense, where, again, you're making sure healthcare workers, first responders are vaccinated. I think you then move to the more vulnerable populations, which would obviously be elderly people. That makes sense. That's the way you're going to save the most lives. Also, of concern, at least in the United States, is that certain minority communities are much harder hit by COVID-19 than others. So the Latino and African American communities are hard hit. You could make a case that they should actually get moved to the front of the line to get the vaccines. So to me, I think it's really a common sense approach where the eye is towards protecting people, but also ensuring that we save the maximum number of lives.
There's some crazy conspiracy theories going around that there's an agenda, that certain groups of people are being used as guinea pigs, so to speak, to get the vaccines first. Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's the real concern, particularly when you recognize that minority communities are vulnerable communities, but there's a long history of exploiting minorities, at least in the United States, for this kind of medical research. So it really is a sticky issue, and all I can do is say, look, the vaccines appear to be safe, and our assessment is a reasonable assessment based on all the data that we have. But somebody has to be first in line, right? And so we actually are asking medical workers who are on the front lines already, who are risking their lives, to go one step further and to be, in effect, the very first people to receive the vaccines. So we're asking a lot of them in that sense. But again, everything that I see is the vaccine is safe. I wouldn't have hesitancy to be vaccinated tomorrow if the opportunity presented itself.
Okay, and Dr. Rna, how forthcoming and how transparent are these companies being, like Pfizer, in terms of what is actually going in the vaccine, the ingredients and whatnot? I've heard other doctors say that they're cloaking them, but is there any truth to that?
Well, I mean, they have produced ingredient lists, and as I've gone through the ingredient list, it makes sense with respect to everything that we've seen. So everything in the ingredient list has been disclosed, and the chemical formulas are well known, and their biological effects are well known. Most of the ingredients are things that occur naturally in our bodies. The buffers that are used are naturally occurring. There's cholesterol, there are phospholipids that are naturally occurring membrane components, sucrose, which is a cryoprotectant. RNA is part of our bodies, and the RNA has been modified, and the modifications are proprietary, but it's designed to improve the stability and reduce the immunogenicity of the RNA. So there are some lipid components that are non-natural, but these have been studied in terms of their effects on human beings. So the companies, in my view, have been forthright. And when I look at the ingredient lists, everything makes perfect sense that I see there in terms of how they're contributing to the effectiveness of the vaccines.
Yeah, that's great to know. Now, Dr. Rna, you are in the interesting position of being not only a bioscientist, but also you work with a ministry, right? Reasons to Believe. So with that in mind, is there any thoughts on if there's a divine purpose or how God might be involved in some way with the COVID situation?
Yeah, well, I mean, we could spend a long time unpacking that question.
Right.
But to me, I see God's providential care for humanity in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic. In part, we have these incredible immune systems that are so sophisticated and elegant that really afford us as human beings protection from a wide range of different types of pathogens. And so that's the first place I see God's providence. But I also see science as a gift to humanity from God. And it's because of science that we've had, I think, largely effective public health policies that have slowed the spread of this virus. And it's through science that we've developed these vaccines. And to me, it's almost eerie when you think about the fact that these RNA vaccines, which are so amenable to very rapid production and large-scale production of vaccines, were actually at the point of being, again, used in human clinical trials when COVID-19 hit, which meant that literally within days, the Pfizer and Moderna scientists had workable candidates once the gene sequence for the spike protein was available, and were already progressing them into animal studies and into small-scale human clinical studies within days. That coincidence and timing, to me, screams of God's providential care for humanity, that we were already positioned to deal with this pandemic because of God's providence.
Isn't that interesting? Well, it looks like we are out of time, but thanks so much for your time today, Dr. Rna.
My pleasure.
Christmas is normally such a wonderful time of year, although we can easily get stressed out and lose sight of the reason for the season. And this year in particular, Christmas has some real challenges because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Joining us via Skype to discuss this is Lethbridge Pastor Rowan Crown of Amazing Grace Community Church. Pastor Rowan, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for having me on, Jeanette. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. So, Pastor Rowan, I think the basic challenge for many this year is that they're going to be celebrating Christmas at home without close relatives and friends joining them. And for many, they'll be completely by themselves. As humans, we need connection. So if someone is already struggling with depression, this is not good news, is it?
No, it's really new. We've been adjusting to during the midst of this pandemic, but especially in times where we usually celebrate with family and friends, neighbors, whoever that is, church community. It makes it even more difficult this year that we can't be doing those things. We've been told that it'd be best for us not to.
Yeah, exactly. So what can we as individuals do to help, keeping in mind that we're under such tight restrictions? Can simply doing something like dropping off a card or baking cookies, leaving them on somebody's front porch, can that make a difference?
I think so. I think any ways you can find for yourself, those who you care about in your community, that you're allowed to do, try them, right? Find ways in which to make those. I think you're right. I think we are people who need that connection, and almost that presence connection. So there's ways that we can do that and safely based upon the restrictions that we have, I believe. Now it's not right. It's not the best scenario, but I think we have to do with what we know and what we can. And so figuring out those ways, I think, is some of the things that I've heard are just great ways to connect and be.
Yeah. Now, depending on where you live in Canada, some provinces will allow you to invite a person who lives on their own to be part of your family, like bubble, so to speak. So in cases like this, should we make a point of inviting them into your home for a Christmas meal? I know here in Alberta, it's a little bit different. We might be restricted from doing this. What have you heard?
Yeah, I think what you have to do is you have to look at the restrictions that are in place in your area and make a wise decision based upon that, right? We've looked at restrictions here in Alberta and said, okay, you're allowed to do a physical activity with someone, right? So go for a walk, even though it's cold, right? Go for a walk and social with them. That's what we've been telling our kids. Hey, figure out ways in which you can do that. Connect even by dropping something off of their home, making something for them. It's a way in which you can continually connect, even though it's harder. I think by the process of making those efforts, you are connecting with them, right? And I think that's important for this time of year. We just can't give up right? And we can't just give up and it's not going to happen. We have to work with what we have in order to make those connections.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I've heard that some churches are planning on knocking on doors, staying 6 feet back and wearing a mask, of course, and just wishing people a Merry Christmas, asking how they're doing, if they need anything, offering to pray, and also dropping off a postcard with an invitation to join them for an online service. Your thoughts on this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think if you know the community, right, you know the people in your community, and you've made connection with the community. I think that's a great suggestion. I think this time of year it is important to allow those opportunities to connect with people. I think this is a great way in which the church or the local church can really make an impact in the community.
Mm-hmm. Now, from your experience as a pastor, what are the top struggles people typically face during the holidays?
A lot of the struggles are the fact that we're in the holidays and we haven't lived up to our own expectations of this past year. We're not only dealing with Christmas time, but we're dealing with the end of a year. And so people have looked back and said, I wish I would have done this. I wish I would have done this. Financially, obviously, with the of being able to purchase items for people and so forth can create stress. I just think when we get to the end of a year, we're also tired. I think that's the reality of a beginning and end of anything. There is a tiredness that comes to that, and then loneliness. Often people struggle with loneliness, and not everyone has family in which they connect with in the city. For example, our family, we have no immediate family in this. And so when a lot of people have lots of family that they're doing things with, can't do that this year based upon COVID, right? But normally people are yearning for that connection. And so I think there's a lot of things that we look at. It could be the fact that you've lost a loved one, or a loved one is not in their health and you can't do anything about it. There's numerous factors that play into this. And I think I found as a pastor that December, January, beginning of February, especially in the dead of winter here in Canada, is the worst for people's mental health.
Absolutely. I agree with you 100%. Now, I mean, you were just saying that we're looking at the end of the year. And of course, every year we say this Christmas will be different. But too often it ends up being the same crazy rush. Might be even more so this year with all the restrictions and the 15% capacity in the stores, right? So any tips on how to slow things down and appreciate Christmas for what it really is?
Yeah, I just think you've got to keep things in perspective, right? And take things day at a time. I really, truly believe that. I think with everything that happens at this time of year, regardless of whether you're in this pandemic or not, things seem rushed, things seem crazy, things seem almost like they're out of control. And I know for me, as I said earlier, I'm more tired than I am. And so knowing your limits, knowing what you can handle, knowing how you can do the day-to-day tasks and make sure you take care of your own mental, spiritual health is so important at this time of year. And oftentimes I've neglected. And that leads to even more chaos, and more stress in my own life. So I think making sure that spiritually you're having that time with the Lord, making sure that you take care of your mental health, making sure physical in some sort of way, go for a walk, work out. I know for me, the things that I do to try and help me through these stressful times. And I think show grace to other people, show grace to your family, show grace to those you see in the store or so forth. I think that's even important. And I think this is a lot of answer to this question. I think take your focus off self. Be a servant, right? Like you learn that I how can I be a servant of the Lord during this time?
That's great advice and a great reminder, too. So, of course, another issue can be overspending at Christmas time. So, we haven't talked about financial health, right? So, we can sometimes feel pressure to buy for everyone. So, any thoughts on how to set limits without feeling guilty?
Yeah, I just think you've got to be able to look at what you have and look what you can spend, and don't feel guilty. I think that's the key to this. You know, that's where one of our stresses come, is that we're doing enough for people, right? Even our children or our spouses, we feel this. We have to do this and that, and I think just taking a step back, looking at the big, and thinking of ways in which we can spend wisely. If, if we don't have the resources to spend, don't feel the pressure that we have to spend it all.
Now, many people struggle because they might have lost a loved one, and now Christmas often will bring back the memories and the grief. I've heard of people maybe like making a list of friends and relatives in this situation and writing letters to them or giving them a call just to encourage them.
Yeah, yeah. We lost a loved one this year, and it's going to be difficult. It's going to be difficult for my wife, who lost her mum, and it's going to be difficult for my wife's dad, who is grieving the loss of his wife, and because of COVID, he lives far away, and he'll be alone this Christmas. That's difficult. That's hard, and so I think making sure that we can and making sure that we continue to ask them how they're doing is so important. I also know people who have family who are really ill, right? And they don't know if they will have them much longer. With these restrictions that we have in our province, it makes it more difficult for the loved one who has that health condition and for the family members. And I think that just creates an added weight and added stress. Had the magic cure for that. I think praying for them and for the presence of the Holy Spirit, our great comfort to be with them during that time is so important.
Yeah, well, I'm very sorry to hear about the loss in your family. That is really tough, absolutely. And we often experience Christmas Day as a present opening frenzy without any acknowledgement of the actual reason for the season. So should we start with maybe the Christmas story? What's your suggestion?
Well, what we do as a family, and what we've done for years, which I think is awesome, is we celebrate Advent, and we take that whole month leading towards Christmas, and we read scriptures, or we take time to talk about the importance of the nation of Christ. So this year as a family, we've been reading through the book of Luke, starting at Luke chapter 1, and by Christmas Day, we'll read through together the whole book of Luke, and that's been really good. And other years, at different stages and ages of our lives, we've done little verses that remind us of the promise of the Old Testament. And so I don't think it just has to be a Christmas Day thing. I think just like Easter, we can prepare our hearts for this day by spending more time together in God's Word and focusing on those things. I've learned a lot through reading the book of Luke, and it's really cool. Every year, my wife, ever so young, has put candy in little bags, and every day we do reading, we open up the candy, and now my kids are older, late. They go for those bags, and they can't wait to find the little candy in the bag, and honestly, so can I. So I think it's a great way to connect and forward. I think that's the whole thing about Advent. We're looking forward to celebrating the incarnation of Christ, and it's not just about his birth as a baby. We really celebrate Christmas as his incarnation. In Philippians 2, that he came as a servant, right? And his whole life was a gift to us. And then as we move towards Easter, we then look about life as a sacrifice, and then him dying on the cross for our sins. So really, Christmas for me and our family is really the beginning of that celebration, the life of Christ and what he did for us as God's people, which is a that we need to hear now, and really a message for the world in this season. It seems so dark and oppressive at times.
I love that little tradition that you have going with your family and your kids, and that I'm sure it'll be a precious memory for them as they get older.
Yeah, it is. And, sometimes, they prefer rather than the Bible reading, but, we do it. And they know we do it. And it's a great time where we pray for each other and pray for others. And even at Amazing Grace, we always have an Advent series. And this year, my series is or presents, the presents we get, or do we need to really the presence of Christ in our life right now? It's not about the gifts. It's about comfort and the security and the peace and the love and the hope and the soul of Christ in our lives. So it's cool that every year, even as a can take that time to really focus on who Jesus Christ is.
Well, with that, we are out of time, but Pastor Rowan, thank you so much for joining us today. I appreciate it.
Well, it always goes so quick, so thanks for having me.
That was Pastor Rowan Crown of Amazing Grace Community Church here in Lethbridge. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks for watching.